5 questions with an insider, getting to know this week's opponent.
Joining us now for a deeper dive into South Florida is Tito Bonach, publisher of Bulls 24/7 and radio sports coordinator, who's been covering the school for the past 2 years. Thanks so much for joining us on the Knightline podcast.
Hey, no problem, man. Anytime. I'm glad to be on.
The Bulls entered this rivalry game with UCF. They're 9-2. Head coach Willie Taggart has the school contending for the East Division title going into the final week of the season. Tell us about the year the Bulls have had.
It's been quite an exciting year for the Bulls. I think there was expectations that this team could go possibly 9-10 wins, maybe even 11. They came up short against Florida State, which is the big game of the year. It was a little bit disappointing, but ever since then, I mean, they've beat up on every conference opponent they've played. With the exception being Temple, when they went to Temple and lost 46-30. That's the main stinging loss right now, because if they don't have that loss to Temple, they'd be in the lead for the East Division. But, I mean, they've been playing fanatically the past couple weeks. The offense is absolutely clicking. Quentin Flowers, the first USF quarterback to ever throw for 2,000 yards and run for 1,000 yards. So the offense has been clicking for USF, and it's been playing lights out. It's top 15 in the nation, and, I mean, that's the main reason this team is doing so well, and just the playmakers around it have really gotten into gear, and this team has just so much chemistry on offense. And the past 2 weeks, the defense has had 2 big stops late in the game. The defense has had some big struggles this year, but the past 2 weeks, they've stepped up big to get the Bulls the wins.
You mentioned Quentin Flowers. He's thrown for 22 touchdowns and with another 12 on the ground. Talk about the threat he presents and his go-to wide receivers.
I mean, there's only so many ways you can describe Quentin Flowers. I mean, the term that's been thrown around a lot by Coach Taggart is he's a video game. You know, he's the Michael Vick of Madden 2004, if anybody plays that still. But, I mean, you know, he's an exciting player. A tough guy to bring down. He's very, very quick, very moves like lightning, and tough runner as well. I mean, he's 6', 200, so he can power through people. And, I mean, he's just been throwing the ball. He's been in great chemistry with his receivers. He actually had 3 one-play touchdowns this past week against SMU. The first play of the game was a 77-yard strike to Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Then he finds Tyree McCants for a 55-yard touchdown, and then finds McCants again for a 35-yard touchdown. So, I mean, he's just been firing on all cylinders. He hadn't had a turnover prior to the UConn game. The UConn game was his last turnover, but then he had a late interception against SMU that kind of bounced off a defensive tackle's hands. But, I mean, he's been lights out this season. I mean, no doubt this team's MVP, and it's been an incredible story, the progression he's made since he first arrived at USF.
All eyes are going to be on Flowers. He paces the running game. Who else, though, should UCF fans be on the lookout in the backfield?
Definitely Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack is the all-time leading rusher for USF right now. Not only he's tied with Quentin for rushing touchdowns, and he's also the leader in rushing yards. So he's not the leader in rushing yards. I believe he's the leader in rushing touchdowns. But he's been incredible, man. I mean, he's a tremendous running back. He converted a 4th and 1 last game against SMU and took it over 50 yards for a touchdown, and he's been lights out. He's a fast running back that if you give him too much space on the edge, you can make him pay for it. Rodney Adams, wide receiver, he's a touchdown away from actually becoming USF's all-time leading receiver, surpassing Andre Davis. He's been lights out, not only effective through the air. He has, I think, 4 or 5 receiving touchdowns, but he also has 4 rushing touchdowns. Against Memphis, he had a 92-yard rushing touchdown, which was really incredible. So, I mean, he's been an electric playmaker. Tyree McCants has come on late. He's had 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's a big-time receiver, kind of a slot guy for this team, but just a lot of weapons on this USF offense. I would even keep an eye out for Dearness Johnson. He's the backup running back for Marlon Mack, but he's kind of used in that Swiss Army knife role, as he can go out as a receiver as well as a running back. I mean, he's pretty shifty, and he's pretty hard to bring down, so a lot of guys to keep an eye out on for, but I know that UCF has a pretty tough defense, so I'm interested to see how they go attack it.
Defensively, the Bulls are 120th overall, including 103rd against the run and 113th against the pass. A big reason Temple is in the driver's seat in the East was the way that the Owls ran all over the Bulls. What have you seen from this unit?
I think the defense this year, it's been a rough adaptation year. I'd probably want to say that. It's a transition. They had Tom Allen last year, who was a really emotional coach that really bonded with these kids. And after he took a job to Indiana, they replaced him with Raymond Woody, who's was really close with Tom Allen and knows a lot of these players as well because he recruited them from the Bay Area. He's one of the more familiar coaches with the former defensive coordinator in Tom Allen. But it just seems like the front six really haven't played to par. Specifically, the defensive lines really struggled at times this year. Just not being able to get off blocks and not really being able to shed these offensive linemen. And like you mentioned in that Temple game, Temple executed the strategy that most teams want to execute against USF, which is you limit them by not letting their offense get onto the field. So what Temple did was just basically, go pro set, smash mouth football, grind it down their mouth, and USF just couldn't get off the field. So every time their offense would come on, they only have so much time to work with, and they already have a huge deficit. And that's been the story for USF defense this year. It hasn't really been there. There's been occasional flash performances. The last 2 weeks they've stepped up big to help, give USF the win, specifically against Memphis. They had that goal line stand, and this week they had a 4th and 1. They forced 3 turnovers, and then they had a late 4th and 1 where they stopped SMU. But in terms of yardage, this team just poor tackling and poor execution. And times there's busted coverages as well. And the reality is USF has a talented secondary, but when the USF defensive line can't get any production, it has a causality effect on both the linebackers and the secondary. So it's been a rough year. Luckily, this USF offense has been able to carry this defense, but at the same time, the last 2 weeks you've seen some encouraging signs from the defense.
Funny how some wins can change things. Head coach Willie Taggart had been on the hot seat. Now he's a top prospect for some high-profile jobs out there. Still, it seems the Bulls, much like the rest of the American, can't get any respect. They're not in the newly released top 25. Is this a motivator for the team? And what do you think rivalry week means for the program when they have the game against UCF in Tampa?
Well, one thing that was mentioned after the game, we mentioned the possibility to Coach Taggart of getting 10 wins, and that being the first time this program ever achieved 10 wins. And not only that, but beating UCF. And one thing he mentioned was, he wants to make it about the seniors. The seniors who came here and they had that first 2-10 season where things were abysmal. They got blown out by McNeese State in the first game, and it was one of the roughest seasons in USF history. And you look at it now, and now those seniors are on the verge of possibly going 10-2. So he said he wants to make next week about those seniors, sending them off in the right way. Obviously this upcoming home game for USF will be Senior Day for the seniors. Obviously guys like Nate Godwin, Rodney Adams, so many other players you can mention who are seniors. This is going to be a big game for them, and they're probably their last game with USF. So, I think that's probably going to play a factor into it. As far as motivation and the rankings, the reality is, USF, in terms of the teams they've beaten, the strength of schedule hasn't really been there. Aside from the Navy win, which was really impressive, they fell to Florida State, which was a big team. As they're, climbing back up again after the Florida State loss, they have a debilitating loss to Temple, which kind of pushes them out of the conference lead for the conference championship. So I know this team definitely feels like they should get some recognition. Although I think at this point, I think finishing off the season and hopefully getting a good bowl game is probably their main priority for them.
It's funny how arguably the league's 2 best teams might be South Florida and Houston, and neither one of them might be in that conference title game. We thank you, Tito Bonach, with Bulls 24/7 for joining us for a look at the South Florida Bulls and ahead of the UCF game this coming Saturday. Thanks so much for joining us on the Knightline podcast.
No, thank you guys. Pleasure.
Coast to coast.
And even north of the border in Canada.
Hello, Night Nation. I'm Andrew Phegley.
I'm Trylko. Tell your friends about Knightline Postgame Live. It's the only place to talk about UCF's latest road game as soon as the game ends.
We're taking your calls live, so save our number, 407-401-9184. That's 407-401-9184.
Join the conversation with Knights fans across the country. Download the Rabble.tv app today and listen in. Remember, when the clock expires, we go live.
Knightline Postgame Live, your place to talk about football with 2 of the biggest UCF fans around.
Go Knights!
Charge on.